Hey, Nation, this is a special podcast. We're with now first-time author and longtime friend of the family, Jamison West. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Harry. Thanks.
Good. Hey, let's take 1 minute to update the SMB Nation audience. It has been a while since we talked. You and I had literally a couple decades in Seattle. We have both moved. So you sold your MSP practice a number of years ago. It was five?
2016. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 five plus. And then you moved to Las Vegas and you started doing new lines of work. And I resemble that. I moved to Austin, Texas, and I'm doing new lines of work. So, the fabric of life continues, right?
That's right.
But hey, tell me about first, what is the emotional side of selling a small business book about? You said you called it a fable or something. Let's talk about the book
absolutely.
first.
So, yeah, lots to talk about there. I'm probably on my 12th or 13th business as an entrepreneur, but my baby, or my big one in all of that, was my MSP in Seattle. 21 years, acquired four other MSPs from 2010 to 2012, sold in 2016. And what I found was that there are plenty of resources out there that discuss or help a potential seller think about valuation, what an LOI looks like, what due diligence looks like, financials, customer contracts, payroll and human resource transition, and blah, 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 blah. It's all this technical, legal and accounting stuff. But there was really no resource that talked to me about, as an entrepreneur and an owner, what that emotional journey was going to look like, the trials and tribulations, the ups and downs, the near failures, the decision making, the lack of integrity in what I was sharing with my people.
Yeah.
There was so much complexity to that, those components of the sale that I just felt were missing. And it was very important for me. At some point, I was like, I think this would be really important to share. I started telling people about it. I was speaking on panels and sessions and things like that at conferences about this stuff. And I'm very transparent and open. And people are like, how do you get that story out? And I was like, well, I guess you write a book. And there you go. That's where it came from.
Yeah, no, I like it. In fact, I'm looking forward to reading it because I know as we speak, this is just before IT Nation, and it's literally at press.
That's right. It's ready. It's ready now, like yesterday or something like that. So yeah, good to go.
Yeah, no, I'll look forward to reviewing it, and I'll tell you why. I haven't been involved in a lot of M&A conversations with SMB Nation, but not surprisingly, over 22 years, the phone rang once or twice. And it is what I remember is the emotional side. I remember the emotional side of selling a small business. Now, I should have. Let me tell you, the phone rang in 2007, right before the Great Recession. And but I got caught up in the emotion, for me, and see if any of this lands with you. And no names, please. I want to respect the other party. But the number one, I didn't want a boss. It's like, doggone it, I'm gonna have to go work for 3 years. Doggone it. Again, I wish I had, knowing what I know now. Number two, I had advisors, and that's not a surprise. You'd be talking to your friends formally or informally to kind of navigate. And they thought, they're offering you a price here, which turned out it would have been a nice price. But they said, no, you're worth here. You're worth here. Don't do it. You're worth here. Do any of those resonate with you? The I don't want a boss, or the I'm going to hold out?
I am a serial entrepreneur. I've told people when I was approached, and actually I'm not unhappy sharing, and they wouldn't be unhappy sharing the name of who I sold to. The story, by the way, is not explicitly my story. I should say a fable is a fiction, right? So it was a collection of experiences, both that I'd garnered through my sale and for acquisitions, and seen both sides of it many times, and 6 case studies that are at the end of the book that take up about a third of the content, that are other experiences that I drew on to build this fable. So let me state that the book is not an explicit nonfiction
Yeah,
account.
it's
My
compilation, it sounds
right.
like.
I mean, it's true to life, but it's not my story. The ultimately who I sold to, the very first words out of my mouth when I got the call, and I've had calls, and like I said, I've had a lot of businesses. I get calls weekly on 3 businesses I have right now. So it
Sure.
happens all the time. And the very first thing I said when I started to get serious to my potential boss is like, here's what I want to tell you about the acquisition. I'll be the worst employee you've ever had because I've never been an employee. I don't even know how to do that. I don't even know what that means. I've never been an employee of an organization, at least not since I was a kid. Literally in my teenage years is the last time I was an employee. I don't understand it. I'm not capable of it. I'm in my 50s now. It's not something I'm going to start doing. So that was the first words. And I was like, so we're going to have to figure that out real early because then it's not going to happen. And so what does that mean to sell your company, transition, run it, help with the integration? But what I learned in that conversation and that process, and this is part of one of the case studies that's shared, is that if you enter into this conversation with a list of things that are non-negotiable for yourself, this kind of came from Arlen Sorensen, my mentor, is a key part. He wrote the foreword for the book, and he was really a key mentor of mine and pushed me in his own way.
Oh, sure.
His big recommendation is like, you need to be really, really clear on your non-negotiables. So when you reach points where you're being pressed against those non-negotiables, you've already drawn a line in the sand in your head, and you don't get emotionally drawn into something that allows you to keep stepping back below that line, right? So does your comment resonate? 100%. I mean, these are exactly the types of things that we tackle. There's more, but those are a couple key components.
Yeah. And then another experience, then I want to talk about why and how you wrote the book, but final, storytelling would be about 5 years ago. In fact, I just talked to the guy 2 weeks ago. We briefly at SMB Nation toyed around with the idea of offering sort of M&A matchmaker services. It proved not to be a natural act for us, but we did work with 2 good-sized MSPs in the Midwest. And I had a guy who came from the financial services industry kind of in my hip pocket to drive that motion. And the 2 MSPs, doggone it, great people. And we were getting closer to the wedding day. And then one of them got cold feet up at the altar. Have you seen that? Or do you write about that?
Yeah, cold feet on both sides. I've seen cold feet from an acquirer and acquiree perspective. And not just cold feet's one thing that happens. The other thing that probably happens more often is it's not just like a generic sense of cold feet. It's one little nuance in the agreement that triggers something that's maybe real or maybe just felt. And that upsets the apple cart to the degree that these things don't finish. For me, something in the 24th hour that pops up, this kind of happened to me, and I got angry and I responded in all these ways at what was happening to the company that acquired me, and then ultimately realized the reason for it wasn't to screw me over as a seller. There were some banking requirements, and ultimately a really good, frank, open one-on-one conversation with the acquirer allowed us to resolve this in an amiable way. But that's one of those things that if that weren't the case, if there was a different person on the other end of the phone line, if there really was like I'm going to try to put this hook in the contract, see if you miss it, figure out how to not pay you 20% of the acquisition price or something like that. Those are the things that destroy an acquisition. Yeah. And it can be cold feet, just generic, what am I doing? So I liken selling it, especially if it's a business that if you're an E-Myth entrepreneur, you poured your heart and soul into something, probably underpaid yourself for the vast majority of the time you owned and built that entity because you're building an asset. And then you go to sell it, you realize this is like giving birth to a child, not which we're men, so I can only speak to this so much, but it's like giving birth to a child, raising it for 18 years, and then not letting it go, selling it for money. Like that's it, like put it in context. That's not an okay thing. And there's a whole bunch of pain that goes with it, because it's not just an asset you've built. This is, you put your heart and soul into it. You care about the people who work there. You care about the clients because you did it with purpose. And now you've got to sell it for money and figure out how to reconcile that, all of those things. And that's a painful thing. It's selling your baby's a painful thing. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that I went through that very acutely, and it meant all kinds of triggers happened towards the end of that acquisition that I didn't expect or see coming. And I'd never had a resource that told me to expect them. And that's what I wanted to fix.
Before I ask you the why and the how and the who, a book that really set me straight, John Warrillow out of Canada, Built to Sell. Wish I'd read this years ago, because Jameson, I am involved in a couple of different startups. That's not why we're here. I'm not the news, you are. But I'm less emotional in my new startups. SMB Nation, way too emotional. But it was a lot of fun.
Because it's your first one. You've been through once you've been through it, and that's something I can tell you now. I'm involved in multiple ventures. I get caught a little bit on things here and there, but by and large, am I as emotional about my ventures now as I was about the one I started when I was in my 20s and poured my heart and soul into for 20 years? No, of course not. I'm a more mature entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
So, but most people don't go on to create 12 companies, right? That most people have the one, and they get to this point in their lives. So I love Built to Sell, because it's about how to separate. I had to separate a big part of me selling my MSP that I built for 20 years. It was named Jameson West Consulting Services, JWCS. I rebranded it. Kind of one of the recommendations that I had to separate my personal name and brand from the entity. I renamed it Arterian. I started saying, here's my personal brand, Jameson West, and here's Arterian. I need to build it to sell. It needs to be of value outside of the cult of Jameson, which I've been accused of, because when you're the CEO and you have a personality, right? You've got to start making these really intentional shifts. So I learned a lot and did some of the right things and a lot of the wrong things. But then it's what happens, Harry, and I think that this is where you were really getting at, is when you sell that big one, SMB Nation was to you what Arterian was to me. It was a big part of my personal identity.
Yeah.
When you're separated from your identity, that is painful as a human. Like, who am I? What am I? Like, my world was, I own this successful company. I no longer own it. I'm gone. So what's my identity? It's a pain that you have to reconcile that.
Well, let's do this. Let's get you back next quarter after launch, and after you get some, and I'll read the book and we'll talk. So we're going to get you back. Okay. And we'll pick up that conversation. But let's start to wrap this up with how and why. How did you write the book, and why? Or reverse order, whatever your pleasure.
Why not? So the why was simply, I'd gone through all of this. I really felt like there was no resource that could have helped me. I began speaking very openly and transparently about my experience. And then people started asking me how I could scale that share. And to me, the book seemed the obvious way to do it, number one. And then what kind of, I delayed, I didn't do it. I think a lot of people talk about writing books and don't get there. You've done 24. You could probably share that ad nauseum. But you've obviously kept your motivation. This was my first. And what happened is, a friend of mine who owns a business in Miami, I've done case studies and been featured in a couple books. So that happened, and I was interviewed for and had some help kind of writing my case study to go back into that book. And the individual who helped me, when I saw the product of that conversation and the handful of pages that went in the book, I was like, that's my voice, that's my experience, that's what I want. And so I was like, I found somebody I trust to help me through the process. And so Bill Ardolino is my editor, writer, that kind of helped me work through that. You've done the same for others. And I think that trust that I could actually generate something I could be proud of through that help and experience, kicked my butt into gear. So and then it's kind of one of those things, when you commit, you commit. So let's go and let's get it out by X date. And there you go. We did it.
All right. And so essentially the launch is at IT Nation, November 10, 11, 12 in Orlando. Actually, I'll see you there. We'll get a photo. And where can people get the book? The Emotional Side of Selling a Small Business is at Amazon?
Yeah, so real easy. It's on Amazon. It is actually fully published and available now. It kind of launched a little earlier than I expected. They moved quickly. If you just go to jamisonwest.com, you can see it all there. It's right. My website links there if you can't find it on Amazon at JAMISON West.com. So it's right there.
All right. Well, congratulations. Welcome to the club, and keep on typing.
All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Yep.